All right. Thank you, everyone. We're here from Unity today to do something we haven't done before, which is share data about our entire ecosystem, about games, about experiences in VR, so that ultimately we can drive better experiences for everyone that you develop for. We start with the basic premise. What if you don't need to go on this journey alone? What if everyone in this room could be working together to not just define and understand what VR will be someday, but to use data from not only what is existing today, but what can be, to define what VR should be? And what's lacked in our industry up until now is a definitive data source from actual users, actual experiences, actual VR applications that are descriptive enough that we can actually make decisions against. So that's what we'll be doing today. We'll walk through Unity's data set, look for insights within there that you can use on a day-to-day basis to make decisions in your design, in your development, ultimately in your operations. And then we'll show you a platform in which you can actually make this happen with writing very little code and understanding from a technical perspective what needs to happen under the hood. So we'll start with Unity. I'm sure you're familiar with the fact that we're a 3D engine for content creation. But we really define ourselves by the content that's created on top of this engine. This is what excites us the most. Crystal Rift, Subnautica, which is something I play on a daily basis, even though I'm not a swimmer. These are the things that inspire us to not only work on the engine itself, but the data platform that underlies it. So my marketing team has informed me that 2/3 of all VR apps are built on Unity, so that's exciting. But more so, we're the only engine in which we've built a data platform that underlies it, right? So that means every application that goes out into the world that's built on Unity has the opportunity to not only leverage data to understand what's going on within that specific application, but also the ability to aggregate that data together to see what is working, what isn't, what we should focus on as developers, as content creators, as ultimately people who are creating a whole new medium, right? So in the last 9 months, I guess, we've seen over 12 million VR app installs. We're tracking 4,000 different apps. And we've seen 5,000 unique devices. And so that is the basis by which we'll actually dive into the insights today, right? So it's the data that we're collecting across these applications. And these are all from applications that have opted into using the analytics package. And as a result, getting access to insights such as these on a day-to-day basis. All right, so let's go in from a high level. So from a high level, this is what Unity is seeing in terms of growth in not just the number of devices and the number of applications that are being shipped. So obviously, we're seeing a spike upwards. We're moving upwards. We'll dive into those trends on a more specific basis, but what I want to take away here is that data is a starting point, but you really need granular data to really derive an insight. Here's an example. This is where we're seeing sessions around the world in our top 10 geographies across all of VR in the last month. So as you can see, it's spread around basically around every continent. A lot of activity in the US, but Asia's starting to come up very quickly. Let's look at another cut of this data. From an install perspective, imagine you're starting to think about where is it that I can get the most traffic. If you had just started with data like this, you'd say, hey, maybe I should just focus on the US and be done with it. Fortunately, we have deeper data than this. We have the ability to actually look at each of these countries on an individual basis and look at the behavior of the users in those countries. So if you have a different objective. Rather than numbers, if you want to find users who will really stick with you, engage in your experience, and help you grow your business, we can overlay a sticky factor on top of this. And what a sticky factor is for any user in a month, what is the probability that they'll come back on a day-to-day basis? And so what you're seeing here is that, yes, there's a lot of users in the US, but across the world, there's other places where users are potentially even higher engaged, where if you're willing to localize, where you're willing to understand cultural norms, you have the opportunity to find users for the long term that maybe other people aren't thinking about. Maybe we're earlier in our development process, and we're looking at where do we want to focus our VR development efforts. Maybe you're thinking about specific genres or applications that you might want to develop. This is the top 10 applications categories as they've been categorized on Unity over the last 12 months. And this has changed tremendously from just 3 months ago, right? So the volatility in what is happening and what is changing evolves as the industry evolves. So obviously, a lot of things are being explored in VR. A lot of things are working. But once again, if you're looking to develop something that sticks, something that retains, not a one-off experience, we should look at what the highest retaining applications are. And what you'll see here, it's all games. You'll see an experience there in the middle. I tried to look up what it was. Turns out it wasn't safe for work, so we'll leave that. We'll leave that there. But what I'm saying here is not you need to develop games, but potentially game mechanics or aspects of games can be built into any experience that you do, because these are the types of interactions that people who are using VR today are most attracted to, right? So it gives us a directional understanding of things that we should be trying based on the data of what's actually working already today. How about platforms? Unity is by nature a cross-platform engine, so we see data from every VR platform out there. And so we start with a benchmark that shows 21 minutes a day, a 13% one-day retention in terms of how many users are likely to come back after the first day. So from a platform perspective, from an industry perspective, this gives you some grounding in terms of what you should be planning for, right? And this is impressive to me that even with all the encumbrances of VR today, even as we develop it, the people are still spending significant amounts of time that maybe isn't mobile, but is on the same scale as your mobile device. However, what you really want to do when it comes to benchmarks is not look at the average, but look at what the best platforms in the world are doing. And so if we are looking to look at the #1 platform in the world, you're almost 2x the session times, right? So if you're already on that platform, you know what you should be shooting for. And if you haven't made your platform choice yet, this is probably a really good one to choose. Moving on. Well, I guess you're all wondering what it is, but since you're in this room already, probably no surprise. Both of these categories are. Oculus is the #1 engaging platform that we have across all of Unity. So congratulations on making that choice. Next, geography. When it comes to a hardware perspective, I'm sure numbers like this have been up in the past. Obviously, mobile is large and growing, comes from an install base. And I think that, in and of itself, is pretty interesting. And you'll see the growth rates are both large, but mobile's growing much faster. Does that mean we should all focus on mobile? Flock there? No, we've got to actually look a little deeper into the data. Just one point that we pulled out is, sure, there's a lot more mobile devices, but on average, you spend 130% more time if you're a PC VR user versus if you're a mobile user. And it's this dichotomy, right? It's this real difference between user types and user groups that I thought we'd dive into today, right? So if we dive into each one of these hardware types, I think we'll find some really interesting trends that you can use in your development and design process, right? So let's start with PC VR, because that's really the favorite of mine. And let's look at where we were earlier this year. Earlier this year, we saw some growth, but a lot of the industry was talking about this trough of disillusionment, right? Where expectations were here, we were seeing reality, adoption, costs, a lot of headwind in terms of adoption. What has happened through the summer? What has happened in terms of actual adoption? We haven't shared this before until today, but we hit an inflection point. We hit an inflection point in terms of what types of users are coming onto the platform. We've more than doubled since Q1 of this year in terms of just how many users we're seeing in this industry on a month-to-month basis. So that's point number one. But point number two is, who are these people who are driving the growth? These are people who have never used VR before. These are people who are coming into the high-end experience who have zero experience with VR at all. These are not your hardcore loyalists. These aren't your early adopters. That bleeding edge has transitioned to a brand new user that we've never seen before. And you can see they're driving all of the growth almost that we're seeing across the entire industry. And this, to an analytics person or a data person, is fascinating, because we've got to see if these people are different. We've got to see what it will take to serve these people. So let's actually look at this on a segmented basis. Let's look at these individually. And these early adopters, these people who have multiple sessions, who've experienced VR, they still spend a lot of time in a day in VR. And new users, what's fastest growing, they spend less time, but still a significant amount of time trying to figure out what's going on. And that's best described in the next statistic, in that for a new user, they typically download one application a month, right? 22 minutes on one application a day versus 5 applications for people who are more experienced in VR. So they're spending more time because their attention is diverted among multiple applications. They're checking out more things. They know more what to look for. So this is an insight into this higher end market in this bifurcation that we're seeing just expanding every single month. And it means that there's this mixing of an audience where we really require meaningful engagement to hold in a competitive environment with early adopters versus an education. A need for education for users who, not just about your application or your experience or your game, but about VR generally. What does it mean? How am I supposed to interact? How am I supposed to know what I'm supposed to look for? So trying to serve these two audiences now describes this tension that will affect all of your experiences because these two distinct audiences are emerging. And we'll talk about more how you can use a data platform to account for this, but it is increasing in complexity in the audience that you need to speak to. Let's jump over to mobile. On the mobile side, for engaged mobile users, for people who aren't just getting the headset for free and actually trying, but repeat engagement, we're seeing an up and to the right, exactly the trend that we want to see. It's growth that very few hardware platforms have ever experienced. And like what we saw at the keynote yesterday, it's being driven by hardware manufacturers driving innovation in terms of the types of headsets, the types of interactions, accessibility. The price points are coming down at an enormous pace. And content. Content is exploding. And so if we were to take these as data insights that we have, what does this describe? Well, we see this describe an industry that we've seen before, and naturally something we're actually building on top of, which is the mobile industry, right? If you remember when the App Store launched, when right after the iPhone, 2008, 2009, 2010, this growth of applications and devices moving lockstep as they chased each other developed a whole market and a market dynamic that's being recreated now at even a faster speed. We're seeing even more growth, but what you'll notice here, it's happening in lockstep, right? They're both moving quickly to catch up with each other and driving each other in a way that will lead to dynamics potentially looking like how the mobile market looks for applications today. If we continue this growth, and if you want to be successful in mobile and mobile VR, the same attributes will be true. Discovery, there's going to be even more and more noise. Retention, it's the holy grail in mobile applications, mobile games. This is what is going to win when it comes to mobile VR. And finally, business models. What are business models going to look like on this platform? Let's look back again to free-to-play and how that developed. In 2010, 13% of games, applications, things on the App Store were free-to-play. Today, that's 96%. Not surprising to anyone who has a mobile device. Where are we in VR? We've gone up 50% this year, from 3% to 6%. But that doesn't mean we can sleep on this, because these are the same users who are moving from left to right. They have the same expectations. They have the same experiences. Are they going to be willing to pay for premium content through this hardware platform? Potentially not. And if not, how are you going to be successful in such a diverse landscape, focused on trying to drive discovery while at the same time thinking about monetization? So we won't dive specifically into monetization today as part of analytics, but I will mention, and this is definitely worth checking out, is that Unity separately has created more monetization opportunities, both in IAP, and here's an ad for an ad. Virtual rooms, which are the new IAB standard for ads, encourage you to check that out, because potentially this is what monetization is going to look like in the years to come. But overall, what does this mean? What does all of this data mean? What do driving all these insights mean? It's really very, very simple. It means data matters. You have to have access to data. You have to be able to analyze it, and you have to be able to act upon it. So what we've shown you here is data about the industry, and Unity's going to continue to do this. My team is in charge of not just collecting this data, producing these insights. So come talk to us if there's specific insights about the industry that you're curious about or that you want us to track. We're working on understanding better what interaction patterns are working, what UI potentially is applicable for certain situations, and we'll be publishing against that coming up. But help us drive what it is that you need to understand to be better. Conversely, data matters within your own specific circumstance and application. It matters that you are tracking and understanding what's happening on a day-to-day, minute-by-minute basis, user by user, so that you can actually take advantage of these insights and turn them around and actually work on it. And what we call this is our collect, analyze, and adapt loop. And it's how we've designed the Unity analytics system. But more importantly, it's a workflow, right? So no matter what data platform you're using, what engine, what analytics package, ultimately what integration, I would encourage you to think through data as a part of the creative process. Not a replacement for it, but the guidepost that we talked about in terms of how you want to navigate that with your own application, right? So we're going to show you a real live example today. We'll use Unity Analytics because that's what I happen to know. But our good friends at Campo Santos, any of you guys familiar with this content? Cool. It's maybe a little non-apropos given the fires that are going on in Napa, so apologize for that, but we had the demo set up already. But maybe we can call up the project and get that plugged in. And what it is you're starting at the top of a watchtower, right? All the users start, you look around, you gaze over the landscape, and you start to see things that may be of interest, right? And what we want to have happen is for users to find that thing of interest, come down out of the watchtower, and move towards the thing of interest, which is where stage 2 of the action happens, right? So, Rambod, maybe you can describe what we're looking at here?
So just like John said, up here we have the top of the watchtower where players start. And here we kind of encourage players to kind of look around a little bit, while off in the distance to the left, we'll notice a fire that we place. And we hope that that catches players' attention. They see the fire after exploring the tower, and them in charge of the forest and keeping the forest safe, leave the watchtower to investigate the source of the fire.
Right. So from a high level, conceptually, this looks like it makes sense. When we looked at it for the first time, we said, yeah, it should be a no-brainer. I'm sure this is happening. I'm sure the users are doing this. But if you do not collect the data, if you do not have access to what is actually happening, you're only left with a guess. And you're out there blindly making decisions based on intuition. So we're going to show you how you can use data and intuition to make even better decisions faster, and then, as we talked about, act upon it, right? So the first step is collection of data. Rambod, maybe you can show us how we can collect data in the Unity environment without the need of external SDKs and a whole bunch of code and, well, you know the pain, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so before I was at Unity, I was working in VR, and one of the biggest problems was, when we go to collect analytics, we have to figure out what solution to use. Then import a package, and once you do that, of course, it breaks every other plugin you have in your project. Then you spend weeks just trying to get the content to work again with the new package that you just imported.
Allegedly.
And the benefit of us is that we are fully integrated into the editor. So all that means is, in order to turn on analytics, all you have to do is go to Windows, turn on the Services tab, go into here, and you flick a switch, and that's it. And already you have analytics enabled into your project. And with that one flick, you get a lot of useful information. We'll be able to show you the number of active players you have, the number of sessions, your retention rates, and we'll also be able to do that across different segments that come pre-made for you. And those are going to be your player lifecycle segments and geography segments as well. And you can also use all of this to build a funnel, see where players are dropping off in your game, and to see how far people are progressing inside your experience.
Cool. So before we move on, just to mention, so this is the first building block, right? We collected data, as we did with the industry data, and we took a high-level look, right? We used this, I forgot to mention, free application as part of Unity, and we were able to start to understand data. And so in this case, just from a high level, looking at the overall population, we saw a drop in retention right off the bat, right? So from flicking that switch, we realized the players who were coming into the game were not sticking with it. And so that led us to really start to think about, what is it that users are doing? What is it that users are doing within this environment? And how could we actually get access to the data that would allow us to understand this better? So Rambod, maybe you can show us the heat map feature?
Sure. So to that point, when you turn on analytics for a project, there's going to be things that are specific to your experience that you're really going to care about. And that's why we built out the custom events feature. With that, you can send events to track things like number of teleports, let's say, the number of items people picked up, different interactions that they did, or transitions between scenes. However, when we're talking about VR, your experience goes way beyond that. What we really care about is positional and rotational data, especially of the headset, in order to be able to actually see what people inside your experiences are looking at. Because you can spend weeks and months working on a thing to catch someone's eye, and if it never does, what was the point? So in order to do that, we built the heat maps. And in order to send a heat maps event, it's very simple. All you do is you call heatmapEvent.send. You give it an event name. In this case, we call the event player position. You pass it a transform, which has the rotational and positional information. In this case, the script is attached to the actual camera that the player uses. So we just pass in the transform of that object. And we also pass in time since level load, which that way we can actually then play back the events in the order that we receive them and be able to break that down by time.
So why don't we do that?
Sure. So right now, what we've done is we were looking at the data for players, and we're going to aggregate it by units of 1 as far as space goes. So in other words, every Unity unit is going to be treated as the same position to lessen the noise in the data. We don't care about aggregating rotation right now because we just want to see how players move through the level. Then we're also going to aggregate by units of 1 time unit. And now what we can actually do is we can hit play here, and you'll actually see players move throughout your level. What this is showing us now is by about 35 seconds, we have some people actually going outside. At about a minute in, most of our players have left. And when we kind of look at around a minute and a half, we notice that there's some players that are still up in the tower. A few leave, but some of them just disappear up in the tower. What this is actually showing us is that some players are leaving, but some players actually stop the experience inside the tower.
So let's pause here. And if we go back to the earlier discussion around the types of users that we're now seeing in VR experiences, it leads us to create a hypothesis, right? Potentially we create the hypothesis that maybe some users who are less experienced are not seeing what they should be seeing, while users who are more experienced might be doing exactly that. So let's see if we can do that with the heat maps and see if we can actually confirm this hypothesis.
Sure. So when we talk about segmentation, what we actually did was we created 2 different segments. One for our early adopters, people that have had experience in VR, and another for our people that are new to VR. And what we can actually do now is break apart that data, because we have this theory that the 2 different player groups are going to be experiencing this differently. So let's actually compare the data. So first, we're going to look at data for early adopters and see how they move throughout the level. When we hit play, we notice that some people are moving around, they're looking. Our first players leave about 30 seconds in. And by about a minute and a half, people are starting to filter out some more. And we have one last straggler, and maybe they were looking at something shiny, and even they make it out. So what we're seeing here is that 100% of our early adopters are actually making it outside the level at one point or another.
And so the key here is we didn't write any code, we didn't change the client, we didn't change the project itself. But because we had collected the richness of the data, that we were able to do this on the server side just using the analytics package, creating these segments on the fly. Mm-hmm. So maybe the flip side of the hypothesis is the new user.
Yeah, so when we look at the new user's data, we can see that we have our new users. Some of them immediately actually leave the top of the watchtower and go right outside to the outskirts. This kind of leads us to believe that, maybe they didn't actually know what's going on and they're kind of confused. And we noticed that a bulk of the people leave, or just stay up there, and the number of cubes is actually disappearing. So between 90 seconds to 2 minutes, most of our players are actually dropping out of the experience. And if they never get through the intro, we can't really rely on them to come back to the game.
So this is an actual on-the-ground description of the previous macro trend that we saw. New users, experienced users look and experience applications differently, right? Proven out by the actual data, we can then start to understand them at an even more granular level. But really, this is enough for us to go on, right? This is enough for us to at a starting point. And if we were in a 3D or 2D environment, potentially we could put on top of this which way they were pointing, the orientation at any one point in time. And that would help us start to look at, oh, Maybe this way is really popular, but this is really hard to see. And just like with VR development, when it comes to data analysis in VR, we have to change how we think about looking at data. Because this is an actual VR environment built into Unity itself, and the data is there as well, one of the most powerful things you can do with this feature is then actually put the headset on and experience what users were looking at themselves. So let's give that a shot. Hopefully it's all plugged in.
Oh.
So this is the exact same data that we've been looking at, now looking at both orientation and position. And as we wait for the application to load,
There we go.
what you're seeing is new users.
No, so right now, we're actually looking at the rotational data for both users from the middle of the room. And what we can kind of see now is, this gives us a better idea of where people are looking at. The more blue the diamond is, that means there's less people, all the way to yellow, and red is going to be the highest intensity. And what we can see here when we're looking at both sets of players' data is that there's a lot of noise all around where John is standing. So people are looking behind, they're looking to the right, they're looking to the left. And as we kind of look around, too, we see that there's pockets of yellow all over. There's a lot of red towards where the fire is, but there's also some yellow behind John. There's yellow all over the place. And a lot of it is in the exact opposite direction where the fire is. So something over there is catching a lot of the attention of the players. So now, going back to our earlier hypothesis, we broke it down into the two separate player groups. So let's do that again to see if there's any differences in how the two players, or what the two player sets are looking at. So now if we look at early adopters, what we notice is, what we have is that players are kind of looking around. There's some noise to the right, which we expect, right? At the end of the day, people are going to be looking around. If we make a great experience, we expect them to look. But when we look over to the left, there's a lot of red there, and it's in fact the only red spot that we have. So there is a high concentration of people actually looking at the fire, and we expect that that's
because it's experienced users.
Exactly. Now, if we switch that over to our new users, let me adjust the color gradient. So what we notice here is that there are pockets of yellow all over. And in fact, the one red spot is where the sun is, in the exact opposite direction of where we want players' attention to go to. So what this tells us, especially since there's even distribution all around, that people are kind of lost. They're kind of aimlessly looking around. Maybe the fire caught some people's eyes as they were wandering, and they decided to investigate. But a lot of people just think the sunset might be kind of pretty.
Yeah. They didn't realize that they should be looking for an abnormality because they're not experiencing VR. OK.
Thank you.
So we've seen it from a couple different perspectives. We've seen it from a macro view. We've seen it from within. However, with analytics, and we've been building analytics platforms for 8 years now, just having the insight is never enough. It's hard, and once you have the nugget, you feel like you have the solution. But if you don't actually implement it, right? If you don't actually act upon that hypothesis, and while that sounds easy, trying to get someone like Rambod to actually put the code in, change a bunch of code, test it, and come back and bothering him every day, upsetting his sprint, this is weeks, months, right? Unity Analytics also wanted to address this directly, right? Wanted to actually tie all the insights, the segments that you're exploring, the metrics that you have, directly into the game itself, so that in a case like this where potentially we need to make this a little more compelling, a little more interesting for just our new users, how can we do this, right? And that's with remote settings. So maybe, Rambod, you can walk us through that?
Sure. So remote settings is a feature that's located in the dashboard. And what we've done right now is we've already set up a development configuration for remote settings for our project. What a development configuration is that all devices with a debug build flag on and any builds run from the editor will get these values. And what we have here is also, we have keys, we have segments, and values. So here we have some keys specified for our intro sequence, and they're all tied to the intensity and the amount of flames that players see. And they're currently being served to all of our current users. And these are the values that they have. So going back to John's hypothesis of, let's treat these two different players different, as different player groups. So let's go ahead and adjust these keys and add in specific keys that are going to be targeting our new users. So we're going to add an existing segment, and we have our new users segment here. We're going to adjust these values to be higher.
And so what he's doing here, if it's not clear, is using a mechanism to actually change how the code runs for only a specific group of users. And these users don't need to be predefined. You could form another hypothesis much after your application's been launched, form that group, make these changes, and ship them on the fly, whether in testing or out in the wild. Do we have an example of this?
Yeah. So real quick, too, to show you how easy this is to integrate. Well, we can actually, it's as simple as a few lines of code. The remote settings API is also fully integrated into the engine. So what we do is we listen for the remote settings to be updated. And once that has been updated, we fire the updater event. And here, we'll actually go through and apply those keys to certain parameters inside our particle system in this case. But you can use that to drive any sort of parameter inside your game, as long as it's an integer, bool, or a floating point, and a strings. And now, when we go back to our game, we'll notice that there's a raging inferno off to the left.
And to be clear, right, this is just for new users. For users who would be turned off by this type of interaction, they're going to get the more subtle, the more sophisticated experience that they had before. And you know what? We can iterate this across every controllable variable in the game, across every type of segment, and ultimately create experiences that are unique for what people need at what points in time.
Yeah, and in fact, because we didn't have to push out a new build, the same data collection that was in place is already happening anyway. So really, all you have to do is sync the variables, wait a little bit for players to play, and then come back, and we can now look at the data again, and we'll notice that we actually see a huge improvement. Now, our new users are focused all over.
They finally figured out where to look.
The fires are.
We just had to set the forest on fire. All right, so a simple use case, but what it does is, let me go back to the slides, think about how the collection of data leads to the ability for analysis, which leads to the ability, ultimately, to act upon, right? And when you have all those three pieces, when you have the ability to work through this in a seamless manner in one workflow in your actual Unity environment, that is an advantage that no other platform offers you, right? So whether you recreate this workflow on your own or use Unity's platform, we'd encourage you to think about content creation in this manner, right? Beautiful, creative, thoughtful experiences married with the insights about how users actually interact with it will lead to outcomes that we can't wait to see. And we're so excited to be part of this journey with you. Once again, if there's anything that we can do to help when it comes to data or the roadmap itself, please grab us and come talk to us. There's a lot of Unity Analytics team here. But please think of Unity as your partner, and think of Unity as a whole as really being on the side of developers. Thank you.